That morning, Monterey Beach was as calm as ever. Waves rolled in steady rhythms, the Pacific wind cutting past my ears, salty and cold enough to sting. I walked along the sand, the same habit I had kept for years to quiet my mind. After all the losses I had endured, the ocean had become my refuge. But I had no idea that this morning, the sea would place before me a sight I would never forget. I saw it. A tiny head poking out from the sand. At first, I thought it was just a piece of plastic, some child's toy left behind. I stepped past it, then stopped. The thing blinked. Not both eyes, just one. The other was clouded, lifeless, as though it had died long ago. In the pale morning light, from the eye that still held a spark, a single tear slid down, tracing a path through the cracked, dry sand. My chest tightened. Before me was a Doberman puppy, no more than a month old, buried alive up to his neck. His ears drooped, crawling with ticks that seemed to feast on his suffering. His little body trembled beneath the packed sand. He didn't howl. He didn't bark. He didn't fight. All he had left was that gaze, pleading, clinging to whatever hope might still exist. In my life, I have seen many things. I had lived through war, through accidents, through proof of just how cruel people could be to each other. But that moment, a small creature, nearly buried, looking at me with pain and with prayer, it shattered every wall I had built around my heart. I couldn't breathe. I dropped to my knees, digging them into the damp sand, my hand trembling as I reached out. "Dear Lord, little one, you're still alive." I didn't touch him right away. I was afraid that if I laid a hand on that fragile head, it would fall limp and I would lose him. But then he gave a faint shudder, as if answering my hesitation. I pressed my hand into the sand around his neck and began to dig. The sand was packed hard, clinging like cement. I clawed until my fingers split, my nails tore, my skin bled. But I didn't stop. I kept digging, whispering hoarsely, "Listen to me, little one. Don't leave me. I'm here now. I won't let you die here." With every handful I pulled away, I heard his shallow, rattling breath, thin as a thread about to break. I dug faster, more desperately. My heart pounded like it would rip open my chest. I knew every passing second dragged him closer to death. I lifted my head, searching the beach for answers. Empty. No one in sight. But then, just a few steps away, I saw it. A half-buried trash bag. I pulled it free, and my stomach clenched. Inside were scraps of rotting food, torn cloth, and a tiny red collar, still buckled shut. I held it in my hand, shaking. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Someone had looked into those eyes and chosen to bury him alive. Rage and sorrow tangled in my throat. I turned back, meeting his one clear eye. That look seemed to say, "Don't leave me. Please." I dug on, handful after handful, ignoring the sting of sand ripping my palms, ignoring the ticks crawling up my bare arms. I felt no pain, no blood. I saw only those eyes that held me there, bound me, refused to let me walk away. "You're alive. Hear me? You will not die here. I swear it." He didn't answer, but from the cloudy eye, another tear welled up and fell, sinking into the sand. And that tear, on that quiet morning, on that empty beach, burned into me a truth I could never shake. I wasn't just saving a puppy. I was trying to hold on to life itself, fragile as a thread, yet more precious than anything I had ever known. I kept clawing, each handful of sand heavy as if I were fighting against the whole ocean. The wet grit clung tight around his tiny neck and chest, a death trap pressing in. I drew a long breath, tore off my own t-shirt and balled it into a makeshift scoop. Every time I scraped sand away, sweat from my face dripped down onto his, mixing with his own tears. His body shook in waves, as though the damp earth itself was draining out his final breath. I whispered, my voice raw, "Do you hear me, little one? Don't give up. I'm going to pull you out." A second passed, then another. His head tilted too far back, slipping out of control. My heart froze. No, don't. I pressed my ear to his mouth. Faint, fragile, but still there. A torn breath, like wind slipping through a crack. I clenched my teeth and dug faster. My hands tore open, blood painting the grains red, but I felt no pain. I saw only that one clear eye, wide and caked with sand, locking onto me like a lifeline. I changed tactics. I pushed both arms deep under the sand, sliding them around his shoulders. The packed earth clung with terrible force. I pulled inch by inch, terrified that one wrong move would snap his ribs. I stopped, breathed deep, and murmured like a prayer. "You have to breathe, little one. Hold on to me. Please, don't let go." I shifted again, loosening the dirt in circles, carving out space so he wouldn't suffocate further. Each time I cleared a gap, the sand collapsed back in, but I refused to stop. I worked slowly, steadily, like a man sawing through iron chains. And then, a tiny paw appeared. It was curled, purple, and covered in scratches. I saw the nails worn down, proof he had tried to claw his way out, only to fail. The sight split my chest open. Who could do this to a creature barely a month old? Who could bury a puppy alive, leave him choking, itching, crying tears of pure pain? I shouted into the wind, my voice breaking. Who could be that cruel? Who looked into these eyes and chose to bury him? The ocean carried my cry away, but I didn't need an answer. I only needed to save him. I pressed on. My arms ached, but at last his small body began to emerge, limp, drained of every ounce of strength. My grip slipped and he fell back a little. Panic seized me. No! Don't! I wrapped both arms around him, pulled hard. A tearing sound, like chains breaking. And then, he was in my arms. So light. Far too light. It felt as though I was holding a dry leaf, not a living being. His body was nothing but bones, belly sunken, skin coated in sand and streaked with blood from desperate scratches. I crushed him against my chest, afraid that if I let go, he would vanish. His breath was so faint I had to press my ear against him to hear it. One beat, then silence. My eyes burned. But then, a soft whimper escaped his throat, thin as a breeze, yet strong enough to bring me to my knees. He was still alive. I looked down. His cloudy eye stayed shut, but from the other, a fresh tear slid and fell into my hand. I swallowed hard, vision blurring with my own tears. Little one, from this moment, you'll never suffer alone again. I swear it. I stood, clutching him tight. The sea still struck the shore, the wind still screamed, but inside me there was only the pounding of my own heart. And before me, only one task remained, to get him to safety, before time ran out. I ran toward the parking lot, my feet pounding heavy into the sand, the tiny Doberman cradled in my arms. He weighed almost nothing, yet in my heart, he felt as heavy as the whole world. His body was limp, his clouded eyes shut, one weak eyelid barely hanging open. I pressed my hand against his chest. Weak, almost gone. As I ran, I whispered, as though speaking to a child, "You can't leave me. Do you hear? We're going to get through this together. My old pickup sat at the far end of the lot, silver paint peeling under the harsh sun. I leapt into the driver's seat, clutching him in my left arm while my right hand fumbled the key. The engine coughed, shuddered as if it might die, then finally roared to life. I slammed the gas, the tires tearing across the gravel, stones spraying behind me. The cliffside road twisted like a test of nerves. I gripped the wheel tight, eyes locked on the asphalt, ears straining for every fragile breath rising from my chest. Each bump sent his head lolling to the side, and panic shot through me. I clutched him tighter, murmuring, "You're so strong." Just a little longer, I grabbed a water bottle from the door, poured a few drops onto my finger, and touched it to his lips. The water slipped down his cheek with no response. My throat closed. But then, unexpectedly, his tongue flickered. Just a faint brush, like a whisper of wind. My heart clenched, my vision blurred with tears. "That's it. Keep fighting, Grace. You're fighting." I had already given him a name, even if I didn't know he would survive. Grace. A gift. An undeserved mercy was handed to me on the beach that morning. An SUV ahead crawled too slowly. I swung the wheel, passed it hard, ignoring the angry horn fading behind me. I didn't care. Time was the enemy. Every second slipping away could be his last. Images burned in my mind, the trash bag, the tiny red collar, the deep footprints in the sand. Someone had tried to erase him from the world, treating him as nothing but waste. The thought shook me with rage, but it also sealed my resolve. I would prove them wrong. I would keep him alive, no matter the cost. Old Cypress Road stretched into town, rough and gravel-strewn. I took a curve too fast, the truck skidding, my chest hammering like it might explode. I glanced down. Grace whimpered, the sound faint as air. I gritted my teeth, tears spilling onto his forehead. "Don't leave me, little one." "You've suffered enough. Let me carry the rest." The vet's clinic was only a few miles away, yet the distance stretched like forever. I counted his breaths, every fragile flutter of his ribcage. Each pause was too long, and my own heart seized. I prayed under my breath, repeating it like a broken hymn. "Lord, please, keep him here. Don't let him slip away in my arms." At last, the clinic's sign came into view, blurred in the noon glare. I nearly screamed, pressed the gas one final time, and the truck fishtailed into the lot. I slammed the brakes, threw the door open, and charged forward with Grace clutched tight against me. There was no thought, no fear left. Only one truth. Either he was saved now, or I would lose him forever. I burst through the clinic doors, my voice breaking, desperate, raw. He was buried alive. Please, save him. I burst into the clinic, my hands shaking as I clutched Grace. My voice cracked, raw and desperate. "He was buried alive. Please, save him. Please." A young technician startled, eyes wide, then rushed to me. She scooped Grace from my arms, gentle but urgent, and vanished through the emergency door. Behind her, the door shut with a sharp click, leaving me standing alone in the lobby. The silence pressed down on me like a weight. The clock ticked on the wall. The hum of the air conditioner filled the ceiling. I stood there, my hands caked with blood and sand, with nothing left to do but wait. I sank into a plastic chair, my knees weak, my hands clenched tight together. In my mind, I saw Grace as I first found him, one cloudy eye, one bright eye, glistening with tears, begging me not to walk away. I whispered almost to myself, "If she doesn't make it, I don't know what I'll have left." Memories swept in. I thought back to the last day with Max, my companion of 14 years. That cold exam room, the steady drizzle outside, his head resting in my lap as the vet gave him the final injection. I kissed his gray muzzle one last time, and I swore I would never endure another goodbye like that again. I promised myself my heart wouldn't be shattered twice. Yet, here I was. In only a few short minutes, this tiny Doberman had broken through every wall I had built over the years. I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let go. Noise drifted from the emergency room, the sharp beeping of monitors, the clatter of metal instruments. And then, suddenly, one long, high-pitched tone, the flat line of death. I jolted upright, every muscle tight. My chest collapsed as though gripped by a giant hand. I wanted to rush in, but my legs were frozen to the floor. I heard the doctor shout, "Cardiac arrest! Start compressions!" My eyes blurred, tears flooding. I muttered like a madman, "No, no, don't take him. God, please give him another chance." The seconds dragged into eternity, the thud of chest compressions. Then, suddenly, a single beep. Then another. Then a steady rhythm returned. My heart was yanked from the abyss. I fell back into the chair, my face in my hands, sobs breaking loose. The door swung open. The vet, a gray-haired woman with fogged glasses, stepped out. Her face was calm, but I saw sweat glistening on her brow under the lights. "We've stabilized him," she said evenly, "but he's very weak. One eye may never see again, and his body is severely depleted, but he's still breathing, and he still wants to live." I swallowed hard, unable to form words. Only one came out. "Thank you." She placed her hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. "Don't thank me. Thank him. That little one chose to stay." Her words cut deep into my chest. I sat there trembling, my heart overflowing with a storm of gratitude, pain, relief, and hope. I thought of the person who had buried him alive, someone who could look into those tiny eyes and still cover him with sand. Cruelty wasn't just the act, it was the coldness of walking away. But survival, his fragile breath, was proof that darkness could not snuff out everything. I lifted my head and drew in a deep breath. In that moment, I knew. Grace wasn't just a puppy I had saved. He was the reason I could still believe in kindness, the reminder that even in cruelty, life can push through like grass breaking through concrete. The emergency door opened again. The technician called softly. "You can see him now. Just a few minutes. He needs rest." I stood, my legs unsteady, my heart pounding. I was about to step into a moment that would change my life forever. I stepped into the recovery room, soft yellow light washing over a small, hushed space. On the warming table lay Grace, wrapped in a fleece blanket, his frail frame nothing but skin and bone. A tiny oxygen tube rested beneath his nose. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if each breath were its own battle. I sank into the chair beside him, reaching out, but stopping short, afraid that even the slightest touch might shatter him. I stared, and then his tiny tail twitched once. Just once. Fragile, like a candle trembling in the wind. But to me, that single flicker was a miracle. My throat closed. I whispered, barely daring to let my voice carry. "You're so brave, little one. You came back from the edge of death. You are a miracle." I looked into his eyes, one clouded and sightless, the other cracked open, still trying to focus on me. In that moment, I knew he needed a name to honor the fact that he had not surrendered. "Grace," I said softly, "from this day on, you'll be Grace, because you are God's grace sent to me." When I spoke his name, his ear twitched. I didn't know if he heard me or if it was only reflex, but I chose to believe he knew. And I decided then, If he had the courage to survive that hell, I would have the courage to open my heart again. The days that followed were a string of trials. Grace was too weak to stand. I came every day, sitting for hours by his side, reading the paper, whispering, or simply listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor. The doctors administered fluids, treated his wounds, and applied ointment where parasites had eaten his skin raw. He never complained, never whimpered, only looked at me with those eyes, as if to remind me, I'm still here. Don't leave me. On the third day, the vet told me, you can try letting him stand for a bit. His body is shaky, but he may try. I knelt by the table, unwrapped the blanket, and lifted him carefully. His tiny body trembled like a brittle branch in the wind. His legs buckled, but then he pushed, quivering, rising just a little higher. Only for a few seconds before collapsing back into my arms. I broke down, holding him close. You did it, Grace. You stood. You're fighting on the 5th day. He tried again. This time, he held himself longer. His thin legs shook, his small head lifted, his eye locked on me. I spread my arms wide, waiting, and Grace took a step. Just one. Wobbly, heavy, but his first step back toward life. He collapsed right after, but I gathered him up, laughing through my tears. I had never felt more alive. On the 7th day, I came earlier than usual. The door opened, and there he was, lying in his kennel, eyes bright, tail wagging faintly at the sight of me. I opened the latch and lifted him out. To my surprise, Grace squirmed, wanting down. I set him gently on the floor. He stood, unsteady, then tottered toward me, one shaky step after another. I dropped to my knees, arms wide. He made it 3 steps before falling, and when he fell straight into my arms. I held him tight, tears streaming onto his scarred coat. You are my little warrior. You chose to live, and you've taught me that hope never dies. That night, I drove home in the glow of sunset, the ocean wind streaming through the window. On the seat beside me, Grace slept wrapped in his blanket, his breathing rough but steady. Each small sound was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I knew the journey ahead would be long. He would remain blind in one eye, his body marked by scars. But he had returned from the grave, and I, a man who thought his heart had frozen forever, felt it beating strong again, thanks to a tiny soul named Grace. 2 weeks after that fateful day, as the sun cast gold over the Monterey shore, I carried Grace to the truck. His body was still thin, his left eye still clouded, but his steps had grown stronger. I knew I had to bring him back to the place where it all began, the beach, the place that had once nearly become his grave. On the drive, my chest felt heavy. I wondered if this was the right thing to do. Would the memory of that beach terrify him? Or did he need to return there to prove to the world and to himself that he had survived? When we arrived, the ocean wind swept through the windows, bringing salt and the familiar rhythm of waves. I opened the door, carried Grace out, and set him down on the sand. At first he froze. His good eye shone, scanning the horizon, while his blind eyes stayed shut tight. I held my breath, afraid he might tremble and collapse or turn away in fear. But he didn't. He lifted his head and inhaled deeply. His drooping ears flicked with the breeze. Then, without warning, he took one step, then another. Tiny prints pressed into the damp sand, slow, shaky, but deliberate. I followed, my heart racing. He led me straight to the very spot where I had found him. I had placed a small wooden stake there to mark it. Grace stopped, lowered his nose, and sniffed for a long moment. I braced for trembling. But instead, he sat, calm, his gaze turned toward the sea. I knelt beside him, my hand resting on his narrow back. "You did it, Grace. This isn't your grave anymore. This is where your life began again." And then, something I never expected happened. Grace sprang up and ran. He ran across the very sand that once held him captive. His stride was clumsy, zigzagging like a child learning to walk, but every step was a declaration. A bark rang out, hoarse, weak, but his first bark since I'd known him. I froze, then laughed through tears. He turned, charging toward me, colliding hard against my chest, knocking me flat into the sand. I wrapped my arms around him, burying my face in his scarred coat. "That's right, little one. This is your world now. No one can ever bury you again." I lifted my eyes to the sky. The waves still broke, gulls still cried overhead, but in my heart the moment felt more sacred than any church. Here, at the place that had nearly been his grave, Grace had turned it into a playground of life. We stayed there for a long time. I watched as he dug at the sand, as if to prove that this time he was the one in control of the earth. He lifted his head, his good eye clear and bright, fixed on the ocean. The afternoon sun struck it, making it glimmer like a gem. I pulled the small knife from my pocket and carved into the wooden stake. Hope was buried here, but it rose again. Grace wandered back, leaning his frail body against my leg. I laid my hand gently on his head and whispered, "You didn't just save yourself. You saved me too. You made me believe that some things never die. Compassion, hope, and love." I knew the journey wasn't over. His body still bore wounds, and so did my soul. But from the moment Grace barked across that beach, I understood. Neither of us would ever walk alone again. Time passed, and Grace grew up in my arms. From a skin-and-bone Doberman pup, he became a creature full of life, though the scars on his body would never fade. His left eye remained blind forever, but his right eye burned bright, always fixed on me as if afraid that if he looked away for even a second, I might disappear. Every morning, as the sun spilled gold across the Monterey shore, I found Grace waiting by the door, tail gently wagging, ready for our walk. We took the gravel path down to the ocean, to the place where I had once found him buried in despair. Now his steps no longer trembled. He ran ahead, glancing back at me, his look radiant as if to say, "I survived. I belong here." One afternoon, I sat on the wooden chair by the porch. Grace rested his head against my leg, his breathing steady. And I realized he wasn't just the dog I saved. He was my salvation. Since losing Max, my heart had been shut tight, hard as stone. But Grace, by surviving the cruelest of fates, had tapped gently on that door and forced it open. I remember that autumn evening. The air was crisp, the sunlight slanting across the beach. Grace and I sat by the wooden stake I had carved. Hope was buried here, but it rose again. He lay beside me, head on my knee, eyes half closed. I touched the scar where his blind eye had been lost, my voice breaking. "You know, Grace, they tried to bury you, but you taught me that hope can't be buried. You brought me back to life." As if answering, his small tail thumped harder, and I listened to his steady breath. Softer, sweeter than any music I had ever known. News of Grace spread across town. Neighbors, friends, even strangers stopped to pet him, smiling as they heard his story. They couldn't believe it. A puppy buried in the sand up to his neck, only a month old, now alive, standing strong, his one good eye shining at the world. And each time I told it, My throat tightened. Because to me, Grace wasn't just a miracle. He was proof of the power of compassion. One night, as I lay in bed, Grace climbed up and curled against me. He rested his head on my chest, his warm breath rising and falling in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I stared at the dark ceiling, and for the first time in years, I whispered thanks to God, not just for letting me save Grace, but for sending Grace to save me. If that morning I had jogged the beach and not looked closer, if I had dismissed that tiny head in the sand as trash, Grace would be gone, and perhaps my heart would still be cold, locked away forever. But he blinked. He shed a tear. He begged to live, and because of that, both of us found our way back to life. Now, when I see Grace bounding across the beach, ears flapping in the wind, I know one truth. Cruelty can be ruthless, but it is never stronger than love. A soul can be buried, but no one can bury the will to live, or the love it plants in another's heart. I placed my hand on the wooden stake, its carving weathered by salt and wind. I whispered, "Hope was buried here, but it rose again. And you are the living proof, Grace." He turned, running toward me, his bright eye blazing in the sunset, his tail whipping like a little flag in the wind. I dropped to my knees, arms wide, and he leapt into my embrace, warm, alive, full of spirit. Tears fell, but this time not from grief, from gratitude. Our story isn't just about a dog who was saved. It's a reminder that no matter how deep the darkness, a single flicker of light can bring back hope. And Grace, the one-eyed Doberman, was that light. When I held him in my arms, I knew I hadn't only saved a puppy. I had saved my own heart. It had once been buried in sand, smothered by death and silence, but it chose to live. And because of that, I too learned how to live again. Maybe someone out there needs to hear this story. Maybe you yourself have once stood before a fragile life, trembling, begging for a chance. Have you ever saved a dog? If so, I ask you to share your story in the comments below. Let this community spread love together, so that no dog is ever abandoned, lonely, or left to fade away in silence. And if Grace's story touched your heart, I invite you to become part of this little family. Subscribe, not just to follow the stories ahead, but to stand with us as a voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. Because sometimes, one small, pleading gaze is enough to change a life forever.